Okay, so what I'm going to do is move forward just to these last two smaller pieces that we were going to discuss today. These should not actually take anything like an hour. So I think what we'll do, we'll have a quick look at these, and then I think we'll be happy to hold on until towards 4 o'clock if you want to try out things like some compilation, but as the queues are not available, we'll postpone the main business until tomorrow morning, when there is incidentally plenty of time to cover those things. Okay, so there's just a small section here on how to be a good citizen. Basically, this means not annoying people. So login nodes, do's and don'ts. The login one, we should remember this is a shared system, and there will be lots of users logged in trying to do their work. So it doesn't play well if there are heavy computational loads running on the login node, and indeed if you try to do something which takes a lot of time, it will be automatically eliminated by the systems team. So please don't overload the login node if possible. As a reminder, in terms of etiquette, there's a few things which we might think of as doing on the front end. Here, 5 examples. You may have a think about these and think about whether they're appropriate or not for the front end. So the first one, I suggest something looking like physics simulation is not appropriate. This should be heading towards the batch system. The second one actually is an interesting question. Make is entirely appropriate activity for the front end. The one thing to watch out for with make is that some build systems get overexcited and think they can use every thread available on the system, and so we'll happily kick off 256 threads on the front end, which will probably cause some problems. So watch out with make. A shell script, create directories.sh, is again looks entirely appropriate thing. Something which is molecular dynamics looks like work which should be on the back end, and a tar up an archive file, again that looks perfectly appropriate for the front end. As I was noting, you may have noticed logging in today, it seemed a little slow getting through the password stage. This is apparently related to this problem, which has killed off the batch system. Okay, so hopefully this one, this next thing speaks for itself. Please do not share your login credentials. The other thing to watch out for is any attempts to do something like SU or SU do will be noticed and will get you into trouble. One thing we have noticed more recently is people sort of cutting and pasting things from the internet, which can have things like SU hidden away in there. So watch out for that. So ARCHER2 will, in its final form, be a big system, so you can use a lot of resources. So it's worth trying not to waste resources. And a simple mistake in a large batch job could cause your project to expend a large amount of time. So please think about how you test things before scaling up. Start small and move to bigger problems when you're confident things are working. Again, as I mentioned this morning, home is backed up for the purposes of disaster recovery. So those files are in some sense safe. Things on /work are potentially at risk. If the work file system were to be destroyed, those data would be lost. So important things should be backed up to some external resource. Typically these days, what I find myself doing is putting important things into GitHub, and so everything of value which isn't too large gets checked in there. So that goes back again to the considerations of data transfer and so forth, which we discussed this morning. Again, so if you have a plan to move data around, there are a few things you need to think about. One thing I didn't mention this morning, for those of you transferring data from ARCHER1 to ARCHER2, one of the limiting factors can actually be the disk speed, and in this context it will be particularly disk speed at the ARCHER1 end. So the limiting factor in transfers can actually just be getting data off the disk at the ARCHER1 end rather than the network per se. So that's don't necessarily blame the network. The other thing with LUST type file systems is file system operations are broadly split into two parts. There is so-called metadata operations, which actually query a database effectively of where the files are. And so things like merely opening and closing a file cost time. And it's not necessarily just writing data to and from file. And there's considerations in network and so on. So if you're transferring data, as we mentioned this morning, think about compressing it and doing the appropriate thing. So I think that's all there is to say on that front. unless there are any questions. Let's have a look. Question: is it better to push data off ARCHER2 or to pull data from? I suspect there's probably for a given endpoint, I suspect you will want to do it from the local system in practice, I suppose. Okay, so the next little short piece is about SAFE. So hopefully you're all now fairly familiar with this thing, having used it. So the thing that some people get a bit confused about is that this single web portal account is managing lots of different machine accounts. So hopefully that is understood, and it allows you to manage accounts, but if you're in the business of also managing projects, it allows you to manage the project's resources and how those resources are deployed between either groups or users in the project. So there's if you're doing this stuff, there's more information. There's a user guide for the SAFE itself. So again, now that the end of the ARCHER1 service has been announced, I expect most of your projects will be creating accounts on ARCHER2 now, if they haven't already done so. So you will be receiving, or will have received, your standard ARCHER2 project accounts, and you may have accounts associated with one or more different projects. There's a few things you can do with this. You obviously install your details and so forth, update your preferences for how many email notifications you get and so forth. Picking up your initial password, which you've already done. One thing that if you need to reset your password for any reason, you can reset your password, and you've probably also done the adding SSH key step. So one thing that can be useful is this business of requesting access to licensed software. So perhaps if, as an example, so if for login accounts, so look, I've got rather a lot, so I'm going to find today's account, which is here. So if you go to your the appropriate account, you should see this button down here, request access to package, and there's a down here there's a pull down menu of stuff which requires a license. So select the one you need. If you already have declared your license to ARCHER1, then you won't need the license details again, but you will just need to go through the process of asking for the access. You can just say, if you put a note in here, it says I have access on ARCHER1 or something for such and such an account. That should do the job, I think. Okay. One other thing you can do in the safe, which is good for us to make the case with the research councils about doing useful work, is to record the details of published articles. And you can also, if you're, if you're in the business of managing projects, there are ways to generate reports on usage and so forth for the whole projects or groups or users as a whole. So those things are available if needed. Okay, so that's those last two pieces. Now I am going to assume that the queue system has not recovered itself, and I suspect that's the case looking at that. So I think rather than trying to go through this scheduler material without actually having a queue system available is not of maximum value. So what I am suggesting, as I mentioned before, is to postpone these two sections until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. At that point, I think I'm going to say we are happy for people to leave today and come back at 10 o'clock in the morning, but we'll stick around if people have any questions on things like compilation, which you can certainly try things like compilation if you so wish, just at the moment. Okay, so sorry that didn't quite go as we were planning, but we'll try again. I think the best thing to do is to try it again in the morning.